thought it was just an innocent mistake, something fleeting that would pass, but I was wrong. That day marked the beginning of a tangled, forbidden chapter of my life. Even now, as I recount this story, my hands tremble, not just from confession, but from confronting my own conflict, shame, and desire. Ethan, my stepfather, was a man of quiet authority. Mature, confident, and composed, he carried an effortless presence that filled any room. He was my mother's second husband, and though always polite, he had remained distant. We coexisted without much interaction, until that evening when everything changed. My mother, Valerie, had gone out as usual, meeting friends for one of her many social outings, leaving the house to Ethan and me. I had retreated to my room, standing in front of the mirror in nothing but my undergarments, ready to slip into a dress. The soft creak of the door broke the silence, sending a shiver up my spine. "Olivia, your door's open." Ethan's deep voice came from the doorway. His tone was calm but firm, enough to jolt me. I turned my head, locking eyes with him. Time stood still. My breath hitched as he hesitated, his hand gripping the doorknob, debating whether to step in or step away. His gaze lingered, too long, too deliberate. A rush of confusion coursed through me, followed by something else, something I couldn't yet name. After a few suspended moments, he cleared his throat. "I'm sorry," he muttered, finally looking away. But there was something in his voice, hesitation, as if he wasn't entirely sure he regretted it. He stepped back, shutting the door behind him, yet the weight of his presence lingered. My pulse was erratic, my breath unsteady. "It's fine," I murmured, though every fiber of my being knew it wasn't. Something had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it. I told myself it was just an awkward mistake, something that would fade. But I was wrong. Days later, it happened again. This time, the moment stretched even further, an unspoken energy simmering beneath the surface. Up until that point, everything could have been excused. A mistimed glance, an uncomfortable coincidence. But I soon realized that it wouldn't stop there. That evening had been the beginning of something I couldn't control. The following day, my mother and I attended a wedding. It was for one of her close friends, a second marriage filled with extravagant displays of love and champagne-drenched toasts. My mother was her usual effervescent self, dressed to impress, exuding an effortless charm. Valerie had always been devoted to excitement, to fun, though not necessarily to loyalty in its deepest form. Unlike her, I wasn't particularly thrilled about going, but Ethan's presence at the event changed everything. We arrived together, stepping into the grand reception hall, filled with the hum of chatter and clinking glasses. As the evening progressed, I found my eyes wandering toward him more often than they should have. Had he always been this striking, this composed, this magnetic? Had I simply never noticed before? The way he moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, the way his deep voice carried in conversation, the way his fingers adjusted his cufflinks. Every detail fascinated me in ways I had never allowed myself to acknowledge before. At one point, I caught him watching me. Just a flicker of a moment, but long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. My stomach tightened, my pulse hammering against my ribs. This was wrong, I knew it, and yet I didn't look away. Neither did he. As the night unfolded, the tension between us only grew. A brush of his arm against mine as we passed in the crowded ballroom. The way his gaze flickered downward for just a second longer than appropriate. Every interaction felt like walking on the edge of a blade, dangerously close to crossing a line neither of us should even approach. Under the soft glow of the wedding lights, Ethan exuded confidence. His suit was perfectly tailored, and every step he took carried effortless charm. Yet I fought the thoughts creeping into my mind. "Don't be ridiculous, Olivia," I told myself, but my eyes kept straying back to him. A lively dance song filled the air, and my mother, Valerie, twirled across the dance floor with Ethan. She wore her usual carefree smile, her laughter blending with the music. Then, mid-dance, she suddenly turned to me with a mischievous grin. "Ethan, ask Olivia to dance," she called out. "I need to check in with some friends." Something inside me jolted awake. My heart pounded. Ethan hesitated for just a moment before his lips curved into a smile. He extended his hand toward me, his expression calm, confident. "Come on, Olivia," he said lightly. "You'll have to show me a few moves. Valerie already embarrassed me out here." With his easygoing demeanor, refusing felt impossible. I reached out hesitantly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sure." As we walked onto the dance floor, my nerves prickled under the watchful gaze of the crowd. The moment his hand settled on my waist, my breath hitched. His cologne, the warmth of his touch, it was all too real. This story is about to take a turn. If you're intrigued, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications for more. Your support means everything. Don't forget to like and comment. As we danced, Ethan's gaze never left mine. "Olivia, I had no idea you were this talented," he said, his voice laced with warmth. There was something in his tone, something that stirred something deep within me. "I'm just doing my best," I murmured, though the tremble in my voice betrayed me. Ethan's smile softened. "Don't sell yourself short." His grip on my waist grew firmer. "This isn't just dancing, we're sharing something. Don't you feel it?" A sharp breath caught in my throat. In that moment, I realized that what was happening between us wasn't just about the dance. My body moved in time with the music, but my mind and heart spun wildly. The crowd, my mother, the noise. It all faded. There was only Ethan, his hands grounding me, the intensity between us impossible to ignore. As we swayed, his voice came, low and steady, slicing through my whirlwind of thoughts. "I wanted to apologize for the other day," he admitted. "I just meant to give you a heads up, but walking in like that, I realized it was probably a little disrespectful to your space." Warmth surged through me, my cheeks burned. I lowered my gaze, my fingers tightening slightly in his grasp, but I wanted to ease the tension. "It's okay," I said quickly, my voice shaking slightly. "Really, it's no big deal. Things like that happen." Ethan hesitated, but he didn't stop moving, his hold on me steady. His eyes held mine, unwavering. "Still," he continued, voice softer now, "if it made you uncomfortable, I want you to know that wasn't my intention. I just wanted to get your attention." My heartbeat stuttered. "I wasn't uncomfortable," I blurted out, hoping to reassure him. Yet at the same time, I was fighting something else, a strange thrill rising within me. "Really, it's fine." The air between us thickened as we continued to dance. I was acutely aware of Ethan's hand on my waist, the sincerity in his gaze stirring something deep within me, but the intensity of the moment didn't last long. As the music faded to an end, we slowed and finally stopped dancing. "Thank you," Ethan said with a gentle smile. "You're truly a wonderful dance partner." I nodded, my heart still racing. "Thank you too," I replied softly before quickly retreating to my table. As I sat down, I noticed Ethan lingering for a moment, his eyes still on me. Then he finally turned and moved toward another table. But in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. If anything, it had just begun. When my mother, Valerie, returned to the wedding hall, she approached with a bright smile. "What a lovely dance," she exclaimed, clapping her hands. "You both looked amazing out there." Her compliment only made me more flustered, but I forced a small smile. "It was fun," I said, keeping my voice even. Ethan simply nodded politely, a barely visible smile playing on his lips. Valerie continued excitedly. "Guess what? After the wedding, the girls and I are having a bachelorette party, completely girls only. Ethan, you'll take Olivia home, right?" Ethan smiled lightly. "Of course, that's no problem," he replied casually. At that moment, an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. It was unfair how easily my mother brushed him aside on a night when she should have been by his side. But she didn't seem to care. Having fun with her friends was clearly her priority. I pushed the discomfort down, pretending it didn't bother me as much as it did. When the wedding ended, Ethan and I walked toward the car together. Valerie had already left with her friends, eager to enjoy the rest of the night elsewhere. We got into the car, and Ethan quietly started the engine. The silence between us was almost tangible, stretching between us like an unspoken truth. I stared out the window, unsure of what to say, but feeling like I should say something. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence. "Valerie, she has different priorities sometimes," he said, his tone even. His eyes remained fixed on the road, but there was a hint of something else beneath his words. "Even so, it surprises me how thoughtless she can be at times. Nights like these, you'd expect your partner to be by your side, wouldn't you?" His words struck a chord deep within me. The idea of someone like Ethan, strong, composed, and charismatic, feeling lonely, tugged at my heart. I gathered my thoughts, trying to steady my voice. "Yes," I admitted, my words barely above a whisper. "At times like these, a little more consideration is important." Ethan nodded slightly. "You're right," he said, his voice calm but laced with something deeper. "But I guess every relationship is different." In that moment, an unspoken connection built between us. I felt as though I could see his loneliness, feel it, even as I struggled to suppress my own emotions. That brief conversation drew us closer, the bond between us growing quietly yet undeniably. When we arrived home, Ethan stepped out first, walking around to open the door for me. I stepped out slowly, the tension between us thick in the cool night air. "Good night," he said, his voice soft. I hesitated, sensing he wasn't quite ready to leave. He stood near the doorway, his presence lingering. As I turned toward my room, something held me back, a strange, undeniable urge that I couldn't ignore. I turned to face him once more. "Ethan?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Would you like to come in? Maybe we could talk for a while." He didn't respond immediately. His expression shifted as if weighing the unspoken meaning behind my words. The night felt impossibly still, the tension between us more palpable than ever. My heart pounded as I waited for his answer, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. Even though I could see in Ethan's eyes that he truly wanted to stay, he politely declined. After what had happened the other day, he seemed hesitant. I had invited him in to show that I had moved past it, that it wasn't a big deal anymore. But instead, I found myself retreating to my room, replaying Valerie's behavior and Ethan's words over and over in my mind. I could feel his loneliness, and it affected me more than I wanted to admit. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I tried to calm myself down, but the thoughts in my head refused to quiet. Why was I thinking about him so much? Why couldn't I stop replaying the moment he had accidentally walked into my room? The hours crept by and the house grew quieter. Valerie still hadn't returned, and I had no idea what Ethan was doing. As I wrestled with my thoughts, the sudden sound of my door opening made me freeze. I looked up to see Ethan standing in the doorway. His eyes held a sense of determination, but his expression was conflicted. I quickly stood up. "Ethan," I said, unable to hide the surprise in my voice, "what are you doing here?" He closed the door behind him, but didn't step any further into the room. Instead, he stood still, as if debating with himself. "Olivia," he began, his voice low but laden with emotion. "You're right. Valerie, she isn't fair to me. But tonight, I don't care about what she is or isn't doing." He took a step closer, his gaze locking onto mine. "For a while now, I've felt something for you," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with hesitation. "Especially after that day I walked into your room by accident. I can't get it out of my head." It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't speak, couldn't even think. Ethan continued, seemingly determined to get everything off his chest, no matter the consequences. "Maybe I'll regret saying this, maybe I'm making a huge mistake," he confessed, "but I can't keep this inside anymore, Olivia. I think about you all the time." He paused, searching my face for a reaction. I knew he could see the shock in my eyes. He took another step closer, his tone softening. You understand me, Olivia. Maybe you don't realize it, but you see me. That's something Valerie has never been able to do." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. I wanted to respond, but no words came to mind. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the unspoken emotions we had been too afraid to acknowledge. Ethan finally broke eye contact, his gaze falling to the floor. He sighed deeply, swallowing hard. "I'm sorry, Olivia," he said, his voice quiet and almost fragile. "I shouldn't have said any of this. I should go." He turned away, walking toward the door. His steps were deliberate, but it was clear each one carried a burden. When he reached for the doorknob, I noticed the way his shoulders rose and fell with a deep breath. It was then that something inside me shifted. All my fears and confusion melted away, replaced by a boldness I didn't know I had. I couldn't let him leave. "Ethan," I called out, my voice a whisper, but strong enough to fill the room. He stopped. Slowly, he turned back toward me, his eyes meeting mine. They were filled with turmoil, a battle of regret and longing playing out within their depths. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, with trembling hands, I reached up, sliding the straps of my dress off my shoulders. The fabric slipped down, pooling at my feet. The dim light in the room accentuated the bare skin of my shoulders and the way the cool air kissed my body. Ethan's breath hitched. He didn't move, his eyes tracing over me with something unreadable, something raw. The space between us felt impossibly small, charged with emotions we had ignored for too long. Neither of us spoke, but in that silence, everything had changed. "I haven't forgotten either, Ethan," I said, my voice trembling, though the determination inside me was strong enough to overshadow it. "That day, the moment you walked into my room, everything changed. Since then, I've tried to suppress these feelings, but I can't. Because I like you too. Maybe I have for a long time." As the words tumbled out, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might break free from my chest. Ethan stayed quiet for a moment, his eyes searching mine as though trying to process what I had just said. But in them, I could see the same pull, the same undeniable connection I had been feeling. "Tonight," I said, taking a deep, steadying breath, "I don't want to fight these feelings anymore. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but this is how I feel, Ethan." He stepped closer, his hands gently brushing my face. His touch was both tender and deliberate, as if afraid to break the moment. When our eyes locked, it felt as though the space between us had been nothing more than an illusion. Slowly, he leaned down and his lips met mine. That first kiss unleashed every emotion and desire we had both been holding back for so long. Ethan's touch, his kisses, grew more intense with each passing second. The thought of pulling back, of stopping, didn't even cross my mind. I was completely lost in the moment. Slowly, I stepped backward until I felt the edge of the bed against my legs, and I let myself sink onto it. I watched as Ethan's hands moved to the buttons of his shirt, carefully undoing them one by one. Every movement was deliberate, as if he wanted to savor this moment, to make it last. When he finally shrugged off his shirt, his confident and commanding presence seemed to fill the entire room. He took another step toward me, his gaze never leaving mine. After setting his clothes neatly at the edge of the bed, he leaned down, closer and closer, until nothing was left between us but the electricity in the air. The space around us faded. There was only this moment, only us. He leaned over me, and in that union we surrendered to each other completely. The emotions were overwhelming, consuming. I felt something warm bloom inside me, something vast and unexplainable. This was different from anything I had ever felt before. As I looked at Ethan, I traced the contours of his broad shoulders, his strong, defined body. I closed my eyes and raised my hands above my head, pressing them against the pillow as I followed the rhythm of his movements. At that moment, my entire body contracted, overwhelmed by the intensity of it all. Ethan looked down at me, his breath uneven. "You're special," he murmured. "I've always known that, but now I understand it better." I reached up, brushing my fingers against his face. "So are you, Ethan," I whispered, warmth spreading through me. Everything felt like a dream. As soon as Ethan lay down beside me, I rested my head on his chest. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat was calming, yet inside I felt a storm raging. My fingers gently traced patterns across his chest as I gathered the courage to break the silence. "You didn't come into my room by accident this time, Ethan," I said, my voice low but weighted with meaning. I lifted my head to meet his gaze, my words forcing him to confront the truth, revealing the turmoil inside me. Ethan smiled faintly, but I could see the deep thought written across his face. "No, Olivia," he admitted. "Nothing about this was accidental, but I had to tell you how I feel, no matter how difficult it might be." I lowered my gaze back to his chest, my fingers slowing their movements. Taking a deep breath, I spoke again. "You're such a special and incredibly attractive man, Ethan," I said softly. "But what happens after this? How do we go on?" "My mother. Other people." Ethan tilted his head slightly, pulling me closer as he ran his fingers through my hair. His voice was calm but filled with emotion. "I don't know, Olivia. The only thing I do know is that in this moment, everything feels real. Feeling you, being close to you. I can't deny it." His words deepened the storm inside me, but at the same time, his honesty soothed me. I closed my eyes, focusing on the warmth of his presence, letting the uncertainty of the future fade away. At that moment, all we could do was hold on to each other. If you've made it this far, I know my story has touched you deeply. There's so much more to share, and you won't want to miss any of it. Be sure to hit the follow button, turn on notifications, and don't forget to leave a comment about this story. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. There are moments in life that change everything. When you look back, you realize it all started so ordinarily, but that ordinariness never stays the same. My story began just like that. My late husband Daniel had been gone for 2 years. Silence had settled over the house like a heavy blanket, and for those 2 years I had been trying to piece together the missing parts of my life. But I hadn't noticed how much Noah had grown. Or maybe I didn't want to notice. We were spending an ordinary evening in the living room, watching a movie. It was action-packed with bits of romance here and there. Noah was sprawled on the couch beside me, his arms casually stretched out, looking entirely at ease. For the first time, I saw him differently. His shoulders broader, his jaw more defined. He wasn't a boy anymore, he was a man. I quickly pushed that thought out of my head. "He's just Noah," I reminded myself. But that night, I had no idea how quickly those reminders would become meaningless. As the movie played on, the scenes grew more intense. Noah shifted slightly, resting his arm on the back of the couch, edging closer to me. It seemed like he wanted to say something, but he hesitated. For a moment our eyes met. In his gaze I saw something deeper, something that sent a strange unease through me. I tried to brush it off, to normalize the moment. It's nothing, just a movie, just a misunderstanding, I told myself. But my feelings, they weren't lying to me. During one of the romantic scenes, I felt his breath against my cheek. Without even realizing it, he had moved closer. His hand on the couch was so near to my shoulder that I couldn't tell if he was about to touch me or not. Inside, I was a mess. Being this close to him made me uncomfortable, yet strangely, it also sent a thrill through me. That feeling terrified me, but everything was happening so fast I couldn't even keep up with my own thoughts.